I am today announcing my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
The most important words of my life.
I'm here tonight.
I stand
before you today
to declare that I am a candidate
for President of the United States of America.
I am running
for President of the United States.
I officially announce my candidacy
for President of the United States.
I'm running for president.
I am officially running
for President of the United States.
From the University of Virginia Center for Politics, this is Sabato's Crystal Ball, America Votes.
All of us, Betty, the children, and myself would like to just come down and shake hands and express our appreciation personally. Let me call on the real spokesman for the family, Betty.
It's been the greatest honor of my husband's life to have served his fellow Americans during two of the most difficult years in our history. The President urges all Americans to join him in giving your united support to President-elect Carter as he prepares to assume his new responsibilities.
This has been a long and hard-fought campaign, as you well know. But we must now come together as a united and a unified people to solve the problems that are still before us, to meet the challenges of a new decade. And I urge all of you to join in with me in a sincere and fruitful effort to support my successor when he undertakes this great responsibility as president of the greatest nation on earth.
Thank you very much. Hey, listen, you guys. Hey. Thank you very much. Look. Thank you so much. Well, here's the way I see it. Here's the way we see it, and the country should see it, that the people have spoken, and we respect the majesty of the democratic system. I just called Governor Clinton over in Little Rock and offered my congratulations. He did run a strong campaign. I wish him well in the White House, and I want the country to know that our entire administration will work closely with his team to ensure the smooth transition of power. There is important work to be done, and America must always come first. So we will get behind this new president and wish him well.
Welcome, everyone, to our lucky 13th webinar of the Crystal Ball for this incredible, magnificent, in some ways, election season. And we're so happy that you joined us as we begin to end the campaign season. Who knows how long it will really go on, but we've gotten some clarity in the last 72 hours since the election. We are taping this around 12:30 or so on Friday, November the 6th. So keep that in mind. There may be something happening right now, and we don't know it because we're isolated doing this at the moment. We'll talk about the close races in just a minute, and I'll be joined by both Kyle Kondik and Miles Coleman, as usual. And we will also very shortly, not in this edition, but in a future webinar, name and thank all of our terrific interns. But I do want to comment on what you've just seen. We put this little video together, Elliot Sperling, my assistant, did, of the three most recent defeated incumbent presidents. I'm old enough to have watched all of this live. And I remember the emotion of the time, whether you were for or against them. First, of course, Gerald Ford, when he lost a very close race to Jimmy Carter in November of 1976. And you saw he lost his voice. He was able to get out a few sentences, and then Betty Ford took over for him. Could not have been more gracious. In fact, it was the very first thing that new President Carter said at the inauguration, thanking him for being so gracious and having such a terrific transition. couldn't have asked for more graciousness on behalf of the country. He helped to reunite the country after a very close election. Then, of course, Jimmy Carter faced the same problem 4 years later when he lost decisively to Ronald Reagan. And you saw a very gracious statement, and obviously they were extremely upset, as you would expect. Not fun to be made a one-term president, but he accepted it and congratulated Governor Reagan. And they also had a very good transition. And in fact, one of the first things that Ronald Reagan said at his inauguration, January 20th, 1981, was to thank President Carter for a terrific transition and for helping to reunite the country after a difficult election. And then the third example, the most recent, which I'm sure some of you have lived through and remember, President George H.W. Bush. He was the personification of graciousness, and so it was not a surprise that he said what he did. But he was, I thought, remarkably open, and he was throughout the transition, and wrote President-elect Clinton notes, and they had some good meetings and all the rest of it. He did what he knew had to be done. He had to reconcile his Republicans to a Democratic president who was controversial. And after all, he was elected, that is, Bill Clinton was, with 43% of the vote. So reunification was essential. And the reason we put that together is because we now have, in all probability, maybe it'll switch in the final recounts and so on, but it sure looks likely that we have President-elect Joseph Biden. And we have another probably one-term president in Donald Trump. And we all know that if you were to list President Trump's virtues, graciousness would not be on the list anywhere. But here's a case where he's going to have to find some if he's going to do his job and he's going to do the best thing for the country. And Republicans who now seem to be rushing to reinforce his worst instincts, claiming that he won an election that he almost certainly did not, they're going to have to press President Trump to do the right thing. And you, who are all activists and all pay attention to politics, you should take a part in doing the very same thing, because that's how our country stays together. And there are a lot of people already speculating about the United States falling apart, which would be a disaster, not just for us, but for the world. So the stakes couldn't be higher. As the mask that we distributed thousands and thousands of copies to across the world, the stakes are too high, not for you to stay home. We hope you voted. The stakes are too high for you to do nothing right now. You need to do something to express that imperative that we need to join back together, led by the incumbent president, no matter how upset or hurt he may be. You don't think Gerald Ford was hurt? You don't think Jimmy Carter was hurt? You don't think George H.W. Bush was hurt? Of course they were, but they did the right thing for the country. They were real patriots, and we shall see what happens. Now, as we discuss the close contests all around the country, let me turn it over to Kyle Condick, the managing editor of the Crystal Ball, and let me thank and congratulate them on the great job that they did throughout the season, and I think particularly at the end. And that's what people remember, as I've learned over many, many decades. Anyway, go for it, Kyle.
Thanks, Larry, and thanks for your comments. So just a few announcements before we get going here. We're going to be doing another webinar next Thursday, but it's going to be a special one. It's going to be our 22nd annual American Democracy Conference next week, which we will be doing virtually. We're going to have a great panel breaking down the election results. We're going to be joined by New York Times columnist Jamel Bowie, an UVA grad, Tara Setmeyer, a CNN commentator, Chris LaCivita, a Republican strategist, and John Lapp, a Democratic strategist, and one of Professor Sabato's very successful former students. He was at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in 2006 when Democrats took over the House in that year. We also, if you want to see our new three-part documentary on the challenges facing democracy abroad, and frankly, this transition might be a challenge facing democracy. It's called Dismantling Democracy. It's available on Amazon Prime if you're a subscriber to that. And finally, if you want to support the Center for Politics and the work that we do, just text USA Votes to 41444, USA Votes to 41444. So as we're speaking right now, just a little after 12:30 on Friday, November 6th, we have a situation where there are a number of states that are uncalled, but most of them look likely to eventually be called for Joe Biden in the presidential race. We've got Pennsylvania, where the extremely Democratic mail ballots are piling up, and they are putting Joe Biden over the finish line there. It appears that there may go be a recount in Georgia, but that Biden took the lead overnight and appears likely to keep it. Arizona, there's still votes being counted. The margins may get even tighter in Arizona, but it seems like Biden is going to eke it out in that state. And Nevada is uncalled, but that also looks like Biden is doing a little bit better and appears poised to win there. The other uncalled state is North Carolina, where it looks like Donald Trump is likelier than not to win, although, again, there's still uncounted ballots there, and that state has not yet been called. But if you go to I'm going to bring up our map, our projections for the 2020 presidential race in the Electoral College, we're pleased to say that every state and congressional district that's been called so far is the way that we picked it, including Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, which for a time seemed like it might be decisive in a 270 to 268 victory for Joe Biden. Maine's 2nd district that Donald Trump ended up carrying. And we favored Biden in all the states where he's leading right now. The one that it looks like we probably won't get is North Carolina, but otherwise 51 of 52. So we're really pretty happy with that, assuming things shake out the way that they do. In the popular vote, again, obviously it doesn't really matter, but it seems like that's going to continue to grow for Biden. And there's going to be a big gap, just like there was in 2016, between what the popular vote is for the Democrats and whatever the decisive state ends up being in the Electoral College. So this has been a close election. I think maybe closer than some of the polls indicated, at least in the Midwest, and we can get into that. But Biden was the favorite going in here, and it looks like he won, and it looks like he's going to get a little over 300 electoral votes. If the final tally turns out the way we think it will, it'll be 306 to 232 for the Democrat, which is exactly the opposite of 2016 when Donald Trump won 306 electoral votes worth of states and districts. He actually ended up with 304 because there were a few faithless electors for both him and for Hillary Clinton. So, Larry, let me kick it back to you. What's your reaction to the results?
Well, I think it's important to note, first of all, that in the popular vote, while we're guessing, looking at where the votes haven't been fully reported, and a lot of them are concentrated in California, as they were 4 years ago. You may recall Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by close to 3 million. Already, Biden is well above 4 million, and I'll be surprised in the end if he doesn't win the popular vote by around 5 million. That is an enormous gap. Now, of course, it looks very much like, while it hasn't been confirmed, that Biden won the presidency, unlike Hillary Clinton. But there is a concern that we all should have, and I think need to discuss as a country and as people interested in politics, what we're going to do about this divide that has developed between the popular vote and the Electoral College vote. It's certainly not as evident this year, but the more it happens, the more troubles this country is going to have unifying. So that's my first point. The second point on polling, I want to take the opportunity again to stress we are not pollsters. Now, we use polling. We certainly look at polling averages. Like many of you, when we see a poll that I think it was the Washington Post poll that had Biden up 17 in Wisconsin, not that long before the election, our reaction was to laugh, and we did. We emailed about it and talked about it. We didn't take it seriously. Most people, I think, didn't. There may be some out there who did, but it's pretty clear when you look at the polls as a whole, they did less well in many states this year, and also in the national average, than they did 4 years ago. Now, they told all of us over and over again they'd fix the problems. And I want to hear from them, and I think you do too. What did they do and why didn't it work? Because for most of them, it didn't work. There are exceptions, and we'll point some of those out in a future crystal ball. But there are far more that aren't exceptions. And even ones that got it right the last time, that had Trump up, this time they were wrong. They were way too far pro-Trump, as it turned out on their map. So I want you to also know that map that we turn out for every election is the result of years and years and years of study. And we argue a lot about it. We have some tough arguments. Now it's virtual, so there's no opportunity for physical harm or death. But we do go at it. And we don't always agree, but we finally come together on some kind of consensus ruling. And the number one reaction we got when we released our map, it was this year, how could you guys do this kind of mix and match? You clearly got it wrong. There's no way that Biden would carry Georgia without carrying Florida. And if he carries Florida, he's going to carry Texas, and on and on and on. We've got all the messages. We can show them to you sometime. But it turned out that mixing and matching and doing individual analyses, also based on the expertise of people in those states who've worked politically in those states for decades. Their views are certainly worth considering. They're not always right. Many of them told us 4 years ago that Trump had zero chance to carry their states, like North Carolina, for example, and they won, and Trump won. So, you have to take everything together. But we're very happy with that map, and I think everybody played a role in getting it right in the end. You vacillate some about this state or that state, but I was very pleased that it turned out the way it did. Anyway, those are my opening remarks, and let's get Miles in the conversation here.
And Miles, I wanted to sort of ask you about the one state that's uncalled, North Carolina, where North Carolina also seems very important in the likely Republican retention of the Senate, at least for now. We'll have to wait and see for some runoffs, which we'll get into. But there was something that happened in North Carolina that I think was indicative of some other trends across the country.
Oh yeah, it's North Carolina does a very good job of getting its data out there at some of the precinct level. So naturally, that's what I went to first when everything was kind of out. But one of the trends we saw is, I think, maybe one of the big takeaways from this election is a lot of those wealthier college-educated whites that the Democrats have gained with in the Trump era. Those people are not straight-ticket Democratic voters yet. Specifically, I was looking at the precinct where I grew up in, sort of in the South Charlotte area. It's maybe one of the wider parts of town, relatively wealthy. As far back as I can find records, this was the first time that a Democrat carried my precinct at the presidential level. It was Biden by a few votes. It was Trump by maybe 2 or 3 last time. So it was a gain for Biden. But the problem for Democrats in the Senate was, in that race, it was Tillis plus 10. So I think that's really indicative of where some of these Senate races were won or lost. I mean, if you look at last I checked, overall, Tillis was up by 1.8. Trump was up by maybe a bit less. So Tillis ended up running ahead of the presidential ticket. It almost reminds me of someone who was in that similar type of situation back in 2016 was Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. He was down in most polls, but he ended up not just coming back, but running ahead of Trump, specifically because he was able to sort of turn back the clock on some of the suburbs that have maybe been more anti-Trump. He was able to put up more typical Republican margins there. And I think the crossover dynamic, it's something that really in a lot of these down by ballot races played against the Democrats.
Yeah, I think that it's a great illustration of that in North Carolina. We saw it all over the country that it seems like, and we need more sort of granular data and the congressional district level results for president, for House, et cetera. But it seems like Republicans benefited from ticket splitting more than Democrats did, and that certainly led to what seems like it was a really good night for Republicans in the House. Surprisingly for myself and other House handicappers, seemed like Democrats were positioned to maybe grow their majority, and instead they're going to have the majority, but it's definitely going to be smaller. And we saw the Democrats just routinely coming up short in some kind of a lot of the suburban seats that where Biden probably did better than Clinton. Democrats also lost a number of incumbents in Trump won seats where Trump's performance probably fell off a little bit. But these Democratic incumbents just didn't get the sort of crossover vote. And it leads to an interesting conclusion, which is that it seems like the public broadly was more supportive of Biden than Trump, but they didn't want to give the Democrats full control of Washington, which is what you sometimes see in elections like this. And in fact, in 2016, Republicans did better down ballot than Democrats did, and Republicans did better generally than Trump did. And there was a feeling that there were some voters who thought Clinton was going to win, and they split their tickets. Maybe the same thing hurt Democrats this time, and that some Biden voters wanted divided government. What do you think about that, Larry?
I think that's entirely possible. As you say, we need some data. It's great to talk a few days after the election because you don't have what you need and to pin things down, and so you can say pretty much anything, and nobody can hold it against you. But let me throw in one thing. Here's another factor. We predicted all year, this was one we definitely got right, that the third party candidates together compared to 2016 wouldn't get 6%, as in 2016, they would get 3% or less. Well, that's exactly what happened. In fact, I think they got around 2.
I think, yeah,
and
less than 2, yeah.
This is critical because think about it. If you were voting for a third party, or you have inclinations toward Greens or Libertarians or whatever third party or independent it is, and you decide it's really important for you to vote between the two major parties for president because maybe you want to get rid of Trump. Well, your second vote isn't going to be a straight party vote. You're probably going to mix and match. Maybe you voted for a third party for Senate or House, but you didn't have that choice in a lot of places. So you would vote for the party that you didn't vote for president. So I think there was some mixing and matching by a critical couple of percent of the electorate who were really third party or independent oriented. I'd still bet that in the end, we're going to see a low percentage of ticket splitters. It varies state by state. And I think Maine is a big exception with Susan Collins winning while Biden did very, very well in Maine. But most of these places, and I'm looking at Arizona, for example, and while Martha McSally lost, she's not that far from Trump. They're about in the same place, at least so far they are. And if you have it in that sort of situation, you're going to certainly have it in states where we already know clearly the Senate results.
And it's also worth noting that there are big buckets of votes that are still out in some states. So, for instance, if you look at like Illinois and New York, the results looks like Trump actually did relatively well in those states compared to 2016. But that's because there are a lot of mail ballots missing, and those votes are probably overwhelmingly Democratic. Likewise, New Jersey is a state where it looks like Biden did really well relative to 2016, but it seems like the missing votes there are more Republican leaning. We're also waiting for a call in Alaska where one would expect that the Republican Senator Dan Sullivan and the Dean of the House, Don Young, the Republican, to win. But the results in right now are the very Republican-leaning Election Day votes, and there's a bunch of absentee and mail-in votes that hypothetically could be extremely Democratic and make those races very close. So again, we're still, and that's also how North Carolina hypothetically could flip, because there are still outstanding votes there. And maybe that has some impact on the Senate, or particularly the presidential race, which is closer. So we're still operating in a little bit of an information vacuum. One question I wanted to ask both Miles and Larry was, and just my own experience too, all three of us have had at least some experience of following along on election night. Larry, long history for yourself. This is my I think, fifth cycle at the Crystal Ball, doing this at a granular level. Miles, this is your first cycle with us, but you've been doing election nights for a long time yourself. I've never had a harder time trying to figure out what was going on than I did this year personally, because of the vast disparity between the mail-in and the election day votes. You didn't know, and it was different in every state. You didn't know which state was counting which ones first. So I found it to be pretty challenging. I don't know what you all's reaction was to that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Miles.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I was just going to go and say I tried to make a point of when we were communicating the results on election nights. I always made a point of, even in my maps, I will say, as of this date, this is how the election stands. So I think from our perspective, I always try to be very careful when using those types of caveats. Based on this result, this candidate is on track to. So I think that in terms of messaging on our part, I think that's something that we really need to be mindful of, because again, a lot of these results are unofficial, and I've definitely tried to emphasize that.
And it's also worth noting that we're in a period of transformation, mainly because of Donald Trump. The Republican Party is really quite different than it was under George W. Bush and the nominations of John McCain and Mitt Romney. I don't know whether it's going to snap back and whether Republicans are going to try to nominate somebody who has broader appeal, not just to an intense base, but to some of the middle or in between voters, swing voters, or whether it's simply going to double down. And a lot of it will depend, assuming Biden becomes president, a lot of it will depend on his performance, whether it is a successful presidency or not, whether it's judged to be a successful presidency or not, and whether people are happy with whatever policies come out of it. I suppose you could say, well, Democrats are very unhappy about the Senate, and it's easy to see why. Probably having a Republican Senate gives Biden an automatic, legitimate excuse for not being able to do ABC, XYZ that would be out of the mainstream, at least the mainstream of these swing voters. And of course, lots of other things can change along the way. Occasionally, Senate seats come open for one reason or another during the actual term. So little things can happen. You remember when the Senate was 50-50 and elected in 2000, and Dick Cheney was preparing to be there a lot and break the ties, and boom, Jim Jeffords switched parties in Vermont from Republican to Democratic, and then the Democrats were in charge. So you just never know what is going to happen. And when you count on the current situation being the situation that exists in 6 months, you're often wrong. So we're going to try and stick to Tuesday, because Tuesday is still unfolding, and we don't have a lot of the basic data that we need. But don't worry, we're going to be back. As Kyle and Miles know, we're going to be back for a number of other webinars right here at the Crystal Ball video site on YouTube and various platforms. And eventually they're going to get around to telling me what these platforms are. At my age, you're not expected to know, and I haven't really reached out, but I'm going to do that now that we have a little extra time. When are we going to have that extra time? What did you tell me? Is it after January 20th, or maybe by March or something like that? I don't know.
So speaking of, and probably the last thing we ought to hit on, is that in addition to the vote counts taking a while, and I mean, it's going to be weeks in some of these states. We're used to that in California with House races, and there continue to be uncalled House races out there too. But I think New York State's going to probably take a while as well, and potentially some other places. But we do have 2 overtime Senate races, 2 runoffs in Georgia on Tuesday, January 5th, 2021, that if the Democrats were to win both those states, they would nominally control the Senate at 50-50 with the likely incoming Vice President Kamala Harris breaking ties. We decided to call both of those races toss-ups on Election Day. We try to call everything, but we thought we would call them toss-ups because our call was essentially that we thought certainly the special election was going to run off, and we expected David Perdue, the Republican incumbent in the regular race, to go to a runoff as well, which appears to be happening. So what's our initial read on these two Senate runoffs?
I'll say that it's something that the Democrats have to be mindful of in this runoff is really for both races. We were talking a bit earlier about how the dynamic of the dynamic of ticket splitting seemed to benefit the Republicans this week. And this is really a prime example. One of the areas I was looking at was sort of in the Atlanta area up in northern Fulton County. That's sort of the wealthier, whiter type of part of the area. Some of those neighborhoods I was looking, Biden would have carried them by 5 points, but in the regular Senate race, they were Purdue +1. So that is something because the Democrats need both of these seats for a Senate majority. They cannot afford to have that type of ticket splitting. So that's a message that they really, going forward, that both Ossoff and Warnock are going to very much have to run as a ticket. And that's something that we'll be watching.
And the money is going to play a role. I mean, imagine how many millions, hundreds of millions will be spent on these two races because it's the only game in town and it will determine the composition of the Senate. I'll tell you something funny. I get emails from every possible group and ideological angle. But one thing I've noticed since Wednesday, I've been getting emails and some tweets, but mainly emails because they don't want it on any kind of public record from financial stockbrokers and financial experts and this and that and the other saying there is tremendous relief in the financial community because this will guarantee that the Green New Deal can't pass and all these tax increases Biden would have put on corporations and individuals, they won't pass, although I should say Biden says nobody below $400,000 a year, at least on individual taxes, will pay more. We'll see whether that works out. But how's it going to pass? You've even got a couple of Democrats who won't vote for it, probably. So I suppose it makes things tougher for Biden and the Democrats, and maybe it makes it easier for Biden and the Democrats, depending on what the issue is and how the voters and these interest groups think of it. One of Biden's real difficulties is going to be keeping the left and center from battling with one another constantly. And that could happen. It's going to take a lot of peacekeeping. And then at the same time, he has to negotiate with Mitch McConnell, probably, unless the Democrats win both of those seats in Georgia. And I think we could say right now, it doesn't start out looking like they will, but you never know what'll happen by January. But imagine that. Biden is going to have to work with Mitch McConnell and then sell this even to the centrist Democrats, much less the left of the party. And they're furious about the House results. So all the elements are here for turmoil and internecine warfare and infighting of all sorts in both parties. Oh boy, just what the crystal ball loves.
Well, we will have plenty to write about and plenty to talk about then. And as mentioned, we will be back next Thursday. That's November 12th, Thursday, November 12th at 2 p.m. for a 22nd Annual American Democracy Conference. So tune in for that. That'll be our program next week. I'm sure we'll also have a regular issue of the Crystal Ball next Thursday, where Miles is already cooking up some maps to look at some of the interesting results in the places where we have good results so far. Another election in the books, a very interesting one, and one that I think one positive. At Center for Politics, Larry, your slogan for a long time has been politics is a good thing, and that we like it when people participate. That's what we're all about. And it seems like this is going to be essentially the highest voter turnout in modern history ever since women got the right to vote. Which I think is a good thing, whether you support Biden or you support Trump, that people were engaged and they wanted to participate.
I thought you were saying, I think it's a good thing that women got the right to vote. Well, I hope we all agree on that, but I was worried that would generate a lot of tweets and emails. Look, one little thing is my
brain's not quite recovered from Tuesday yet, Larry. I'm sorry. Sorry if I'm a little incoherent.
Well, as I think we've announced before, you should know that not only was this the election of Kyle's life, but he had with his wife Lottie their very first child, Albie, who's doing wonderfully and sleeping most nights, and apparently has been cooing various political things. Is that correct? Wow. We're trying to figure out what that means, but the suggestion I have for Miles,
I suggested that it was instrumental on the Florida call, as we mentioned last week.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, you know, with the first woman to be elected to national office, either president or vice president, this will always be remembered, this election, for that, if nothing else. And I'm sure there will be many other things to remember it for. But on a very petty note, Miles, I have to tell you, I just have gotten so many communications from people begging you to add in colors like yellow and green. People are so sick of blue and red. And, you know, sometimes I am too. I'm tired of just seeing blue and red, you know. It's another kind of color blindness when you only see two colors. So that's just a suggestion from all of our loyal readers and viewers out there.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
Okay, terrific. Thank you all again. We had a great time. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.